I suspect that if the truth were known, he would be the prince of all 12 steppers as far as our society is concerned. He's got a... I don't care how he does it. But he does it, by God. And it is a thrill to me. I consider him one of the finest friends that I have in Alcoholics Anonymous. And it's with the greatest of joy that I will be glad to share him with you. I'll give you Clancy I.
My name is Clancy Imislund, and I'm an alcoholic. Being introduced by Joe is like traveling third class on the Bulgarian State Railroad. You get there, but Jesus, it's tedious. Joe is a wonderful man, and he is known in some circles for his verbosity, or which is some of his people in Texas call his verbal diarrhea. But if you've ever been in a home in Tyler, you'll see to what extremes this goes. It's the only home I've ever was in where when Joe went to the refrigerator and opened it to get a glass of milk and the light hit him, he gave 20 minutes. But we don't judge. I think that this weekend has been, I have enjoyed the speakers here as much as any place I've ever been. I really mean that. They really have been top. I've heard most of the speakers before that spoke this weekend, and they all seem to surpass themselves. From Tom last night, who just gave an excellent talk, the best I've ever heard him give, at least for my reception. And unfortunately, the hotel did not choose to honor my wake-up call this morning. Well, it's all right. I missed the Al. It wasn't all bad. I missed the Al-Anon meeting. But I want you to know that I heard such glowing reports about Zaidi's talk that I've done something that I can't recall ever doing in my lifetime. I have purchased an Al-Anon tape. Not quite true. I didn't really purchase it. I gave him a personal check. And this afternoon, Jim, those of you who weren't here, missed an outstanding talk, who put a great deal of wisdom that he has learned and gave it to us as a continuing series of quotations from his sponsor. But his sponsor's got to be a very wise man. And then, after the 15-minute break, to come back and hear Lib give an excellent talk, different kind of style, different kind of approach, but just as interesting and just as full of the message of AA. And I've just enjoyed it very much. And tomorrow morning we're going to hear a very outstanding lady who for many, many years was a bulwark of our New York office, is now retired, lives in Florida. She looks younger every time I see her, year after year. I think she found what Ponce de Leon didn't find in Florida. And I feel kind of a distinction myself. I guess I'm the first speaker at this convention who doesn't sound like he's got a mouthful of grits. You may not like me, but you'll understand me. I, too, want to thank Dick and the committee. I was privileged to be here at the first Cornhusker Roundup. And that time I had my son with me, who was just a little boy then, 2 years ago. And he sat down there in the front row, and I don't think he'd ever heard me talk at an AA meeting before. And it was we'd come here on the train for fun, and we had a good time. And I just talked to him before I came in here tonight. He just got home from football practice, and he's too big and too slick to go anywhere with Daddy anymore. He might have come, but he's really my son. He says, I can't go, Dad. Saturday's picture day. They took his picture today, and there wasn't any choice at all on that. And, but he's a big horse now. He's playing left guard, and it just seems the other day he was barely able to get into my shoes. But it's a pleasure to be here. I want to a great number of you people have been to Los Angeles. Some of you have been to our group. Some of you came out and stayed there briefly until your own BS caught up with you and came home again. We don't judge. I'm just reporting. I want to say a special hello to Click W and his dreadful pioneers. He moved here from Los Angeles and blames me for every error he's got. Don't clap for yourselves, you goof. I'm a pioneer. I'm trying to be sympathetic. And I want to say a special hello. There's a lady in this room who is a high school classmate of mine in Eau Claire, Wisconsin. And her name is Alice Welch. I don't suppose she's ever had her name on a tape before, but take this one home to the folks.
He mentioned my name, the dirty son of a bitch.
But I'm pleased to be here. I'm kind of the fill-in, but while the band tunes up, get the guitars and drums ready. I, like everyone else in this room who is an alcoholic, and all the speakers who stood behind this podium, am here because I pursued the will-o'-the-wisp of drinking beyond any reasonable length. In fact, I was thinking today, it seemed like, let's see, last night's speaker was from Louisiana, which is Texas with swamp. And this morning's Al-Anon speaker was from Louisiana. This afternoon we had two speakers from Texas, and I introduced it tonight as from Texas. And I'll tell you, you just can't imagine what memories those accents bring back when you have spent the cream of your youth in the Texas State Insane Asylum. Hearing these same kind of voices saying things like, we're going to hip you. Go hip somebody else, you old... I got in such a state at the Big Spring State Mental Hospital. I was not in the alcoholic ward. I was there for grave emotional disorders. I had made the mistake of staying sober too long, which has always cut into my equilibrium. But I was there I remember I was put in there as a suicide. And it seemed I was put in there not as a suicide, but after I committed suicide in Texas, which seemed, well, it's better than a lot of things in Texas. After I committed suicide in Texas, they took me to the El Paso County Psych Ward, and they examined me, and they told me that I had, why are you doing this, a person like you? I was a copy chief of an advertising agency in the daytime. At night, I was on the faculty of the university there. I was writing a weekly sports thing for the El Paso Times. I had a home and a family, children. And they talked to me for some time, for several days, and finally determined that I was a schizoid personality and a depressive, and that I would require some rather intense therapeutics before I was able to face the streets. So they committed me to the Texas State Insane Asylum at Big Spring, Texas, for an indefinite period, which would go until I got well. I'm glad to say we found a way around that. I might have had to call in my talk tonight. But I got in that Texas nut house at Big Spring, and I'll tell you, I thought I'd been depressed before, but Jesus, this was terrible. An old red brick thing out in the middle of West Texas. And I sat in such a depression, I don't believe I moved. I might have been there yet, except some guy told me that I better never try to run away from there, because you couldn't escape from that hospital. I remember my heart starting for the first time in 2 weeks, just, oh, can't you? And it took me just a few days after that, I found my way to crack through a door and get down a corridor and through another door and across the yard and across the fence on the north side, and the fox was loose in West Texas. And the only sad thing I remember about that is what they said is true. It really is an escape-proof institution, but you don't know till you get out. So you finally get over that last fence, and you suddenly realize, Jesus, they can see you running for 3 days in a direction. And you feel like such a dumbbell in your white bathrobe, just. And it's just a matter of time till you hear that accent coming back again.
Well, there goes that little Yankee sumbitch now.
Yeah. And they snatched me back and interrogated me and determined that if I tried to escape, that indicated I was disturbed. And the technique they had to deal with disturbed people was to transfer them over to Ward 5 upstairs, where they gave the electric shock. And they called up my wife and told her that I was in bad shape and needed electric shock. Would she approve it? And she said yes, because she didn't know. And I don't know what she was thinking about. And for the next several months, I was on electric shock. I never knew this for years till I was down there talking at that hospital a few years ago, that I had gotten the maximum amount of shock treatments that you could give a human being in the state of Texas, 48 of them. And they finally broke me. And I'll tell you, when they broke me hard. Because one thing when you take a lot of shock treatments, when you come out of it, you don't remember anything. Anything. The last thing I remembered vaguely was being in San Francisco. And I said, what am I doing here? And same thing. We're helping you. And we were in a ward there. I don't know what gets me thinking about this. I usually don't talk about this, but all these accents made me funny. I go to that hospital every year now, not for their benefit, because those patients, they don't want to hear me talk, especially. But I like to go there, and I look up at that ward, the second floor of Ward 5, and there's a porch where they put the people on intense shock, and there's bars and screens, although it's kind of useless because nobody ever does much up there. But what you can look, and you see silhouettes in the windows, and you see silhouettes going this way, and then this way, and this way. And what you do when you're coming off shock, you don't know where you are or what your name is or anything about it. You just know you're somewhere, and you walk till you come to a wall, and then you turn around, and you walk back till you come to a wall, and then you turn around. And I remember waking up there. I didn't remember coming to Texas. I'd been in Texas for some time. I looked out the window, it looked like a moonscape I'd never seen before. And I looked around, and a bunch of guys in bad shape in bathrobes with bibs that they were drooling on. And I thought, that's strange. And I looked down and saw my own bib full of drool. And it suddenly struck me, I'm in some kind of trouble. And then there's a kind of a reaffirming of the... I guess they did it because they were short of money, but I always thought if you ever had to really get somebody broken, this would help you. they were short of money in the hospital. I guess they were short of money in the hospital system. But you'd go to the wall every morning and see if your name was on the shock list. By the time you could read it, you weren't on the shock list. So, it was funny. It was a mix-up. But there were some of us who were sufficiently flexible that they would have us come in and do things like they didn't have enough attendants. They had a doctor and an attendant who would give shock treatments, and then they'd take 3 patients, and 2 of us would hold a leg and an arm, and the attendant would hold the other arm. And if you're goofy and don't know what the hell's going on, and you're just wondering what your name is, you don't know where you are, and somehow they bring you in this room and say, hold that leg and don't let go, and they hold the leg and they shoot this electricity through your head. I don't know if you've ever seen a shock treatment, but the whole body goes, ah, like that, like you're being electrocuted. And somehow when you're half goofy, that's my body there, and they're doing this to me. And I'll tell you, one thing that I always was proud of was my indomitableness. Nobody ever could break me. And I don't remember ever taking a shock treatment. But I'll tell you that what they used to do, you knew shock treatments were going on in that hospital because they had a recording that played. They played some organ music. When that organ music started, you knew the shock was starting up on the 2nd floor. And a year after I was out of that hospital and working again and walking down the streets of Dallas, if I would buy a music store and organ music was coming out, I'd break into a sweat and start to panic. Now, I'll tell you, it helped me understand what brainwashing is. You don't even know what the hell was happening. But I'll tell you, I became more flexible after that. And pretty soon I was moved to the senile ward because they needed flexible people to clean up the poo-poo on the floor. And man, I'll tell you, when you get flexible, you don't know how flexible you get. You want me to clean this up? Goddamn right. You bet. And pretty soon I was back to the ward I started from a long time before. And by that time, a lot of my memory came back. And I realized I was in deep trouble. And I didn't know how to get out. Because every time I'd say, when am I going to get out? They go, you just relax. It's going to be all right. It's going to be all right. And that's no answer. And finally I thought I'd better do something. I got to be the worst brown noser that hospital's ever seen. Anything anybody wanted, I did it. I started a hospital newspaper, still running. Unfortunately, don't have my name on the masthead as founder and first editor. I directed a Christmas pageant. They saw on my record that I had directed an opera at the University of Texas. So they thought they'd give me a chance to show my wares. So I directed the Christmas pageant, which was not exactly like an opera. It's about a 2nd grade level so the entire student body could understand it. And the directorial job didn't have many nuances in the performance. Mostly it was just the director's job was trying to hold the 3 wise men off the Virgin Mary.
We just want to worship her, Clancy.
Get back there, Lamar. Back. I was doing all right, but the months were passing, and I started to remember that I'd had a career and a family, and I thought, this is going to be rather difficult to come back from this to get back on the way up. And right about that, in that hospital, that year that I happened to be there, they put in the first alcoholic ward in the state of Texas, in a hospital. And a man named Les Ross was put in as director. And I used to watch these freaks. As my memory came back, little by little, I started to remember, I know about AA. I've been in AA for 7 years. Mostly. Intermittent, once a year anyway. And I knew how to hustle these old fools. And I thought, I'm not going to ever get out of here by being well, because I got to look good to sick attendants. There's no way out. So one day I trapped this old fool, as he used to I was in an open ward now where you could mill around, and he would cut through to get to his car. And I remember stopping him one day, and by this time most of my memory had come back. And I gave him the AA newcomer look, which old-timers like to hear. You see, I said, Mr. Ross, I'm here on a suicide commitment from El Paso, and I don't know what made me kill myself. It's just as though, it's just this funny thing. My life is so good when I don't drink, but somehow there seems to be a compulsion to drink. And when I drink, my values all change. I have almost an addiction. I must keep drinking. And I understand you people have some kind of meetings. Is there any kind of literature I could read? If I could just get the alcohol out of my mind, if I could return to the God I lost in a bottle years ago, and his old eyes were... He had never seen a sincere newcomer before. All the people he had were committed for 30 days by their family, and they didn't want to be there, and they couldn't wait to get out. And I said, could I go to some of your meetings, Mr. Ross? And he said, let me go find out. We don't have crying when Daddy is speaking. I've heard of allotots, but that's ridiculous. Anyway, and I thought he'd forgotten me because I didn't hear anything from him. About 3 or 4 days later, he came back. He said, you can come to our meetings. And I was going to say, what the hell took you so long? But I didn't. I didn't want to do anything to disrupt it. I found out again from a man named Shelby Parnell years later. The reason it took so long is because it was forbidden by their charter to let psychiatric patients go into the alcoholic ward. And I became the pilot study in the state of Texas as to whether or not psychiatric patients could go into the alcoholic ward meetings. And they couldn't have made a wiser selection because I wasn't burdened with any sincerity or honesty. I wanted to be the best one they had. And I was in there, and we went to meetings all the time. And I just, great. Old Mr. Ross would give us an hour on the steps. He said, now we're going to talk about the steps today, boys. And nobody could stand it, But he'd get all done and say, are there any questions? And nobody had any questions. But... Could you tell us some more about the fourth step, Mr. Ross, and how we can reach into this garbage and translate it to paper and then read it and get rid of the guilt? And he'd just beam and say, yes, I can, Clancy. And the whole rest of the room would say, oh, shit. But I didn't have to get them. I had to get him. And pretty soon I got to be secretary of the group. Everybody else came and went. I stayed there. I got to be the old-timer like Joe here. And you'd sit next to a meeting with some guy. Say, what are you going to do when you get out of here, Fred? I'm going to kill that bitch. Well, I felt the same way, but I couldn't say it. I had to be well. And pretty soon they start taking me out of the hospital to little towns around there to give AA talks. Even to this day, when I hear inmates come out to talk at AA meetings, a certain glaze falls over my eyes. And I'm sure they're not like me, but I give little talks like, say, friends, at Midland or Odessa or Big Spring, or friends, I'm just proud to be here tonight on behalf of my fellow patients. Thank each and every one of you for carrying a message of faith and hope to us in the Big Spring State Hospital. It seems as though we were on a vast desert of alcoholism and we'd lost our way, but folks such as you called our attention to the tall green hills of sobriety. And we came to those tall green hills, and the hills were too steep for our weary legs, but folks such as you pointed out 12 golden steps that we could take one after another to climb from that desert of alcoholism to return to the God at which we had lost to the vast desert of alcoholism. Thank you very much. Now, you can laugh at that, but that got me out of the Texas nut house. And the funny thing is, I never had another drink till I ran out of Thorazine. I was thinking today, listening to some of these newer members talk about when they using Librium. I remember when I was sober 3 or 4 years when Librium came out and working in the medical corporation. And when I saw that revolutionary new drug called Librium, I thought, damn it, I missed it. I missed Thunderbird. I missed Librium. Maybe... No. Yeah. But Thorazine was as good as anything they ever had. Those big orange daubers, you take 2 of those... And I came out of that nut house, and I went back to El Paso, signed out to my wife. That was these... I don't know how they do it now, but in those days, if you were a psychiatric commitment in those state hospitals, you had to be signed out to someone who would be responsible for you. And then they would tell them, if he begins to act funny, call up. And if they called up, you were gone. There was no hearing. You were still an inmate signed. And I'll tell you, that makes it sticky around the house. Yeah.
Don't you think you better get that garbage out?
Good idea, honey. It was the answer to an Al-Anon's dream, I'll tell you. And I convinced some people I'd learned my lesson now because I didn't drink. I went to an AA meeting once a week in El Paso and sat through that hour of interminable nonsense while they talked about steps and God. Took my Thorazine and maintained my sobriety. Would thank the speaker if I could find the podium. I remember at the end of the year, I wasn't really, most of the year was spent in shock treatments and nut houses, but at the end of the year, since I'd had a drink, and I remember waiting in Juarez at midnight with a glass in my hand when that clock to hit 12. Now I had proved I could stay sober a year. At 12, I took a drink, and I felt good, but I was afraid of shock treatment, so I went home. The next night, on my way to the meeting to get my birthday medallion, I stopped in Juarez and had a couple drinks, and went to the meeting. I remember the guy gave me the medallion and said, "Have you been drinking?" I said, "Yes, I had a couple of drinks with dinner." He said, "Well, I'm not supposed to give you this medallion." I said, "You get the medallion for being sober a year." I was sober a year. Give me the goddamn medallion. Yeah. It's hard enough to make this program without being thwarted by dummies. And some people had thought I'd learned my lesson, and shortly thereafter I was hired by the largest advertising agency in the state of Texas. And I went to Dallas, and I worked on the Elsie and Elmer ads for the Borden Company. And I brought, my wife was pregnant again. She was always pregnant. Every time we reunited, wherever I came from, she was pregnant 9 months and 10 seconds later. Boom! I had married this Catholic. Yeah. I'm not against Catholics. I know Tom is a Catholic, and I'm not against Catholics, but if you're a young guy and you want to make something of yourself, don't marry a practicing Catholic. Unless you got some private resources, because there's nothing. They're nice, and they're wonderful once you clean them up. But there is, you try to argue birth control, and there's no birth control. You say, couldn't we just use some? No. Could I just get something for the prevention of disease? No. She had the priest come over, and they gave me 2 hours on the rhythm system, which was the Catholic answer to birth control, and I listened intently, but I never could pick up the beat. I just... So I always had that terrible weight on me of my warden about to have a baby. And God, that was dreadful. But I worked in Dallas for a while, and the same pressures began to mount, and I drank a little bit more. I didn't take the Thorazine, because I never did like being goofy anyway. I really didn't. Because, as Jim said today, pills, they do something, but they don't quite do what a drink does. And I drank a little bit more, and pretty soon I got fired off my job. And I knew that I was so upset I went out and drank all weekend, and I started to come home, and I thought, Jesus, I bet she's blown the whistle on me. I bet I'm on my way to Big Spring. But opened the door, and I had a wave of relief. Everything was gone out of the house. I don't mean the people. I mean the rugs and the furniture. I thought, just like them, they turn on you. Goddamn. I knew I had to get out of Texas, and a couple days later I found myself back in El Paso calling up my sponsor, who I'd never talked to, except when I was on my way out of Texas. He'd been my sponsor, and I seem to be having a little slip. Could you give me some money? And he said, no. And I got in a fight. I wound up that night in the Juarez jail, which is no place to be. And a couple days later, I woke up and I was in the Phoenix, Arizona drunk tank. And I woke up at 6 o'clock in the morning in the Phoenix, Arizona drunk tank, and at least out of Texas. And some guy had just got done kicking my front teeth out because I had vomited on his bunk. And that was one of the few mornings I was glad that early in my career I'd invested quite a bit of money in psychoanalysis. Because once you've been in psychoanalysis and begin to understand human motivations and your own, you always have a slightly more insight than is vouchsafed to most people. Remember, I woke up that morning, I was so sick I couldn't move my head out of the way of the shoe, but I was almost instantly able to identify his problem. I remember thinking, this son of a bitch is overreacting. And I knew I had to get out of there, and I was in there as a drunken disorder. They let me out the next morning, and I didn't have any front teeth now. I had 2 matched Safeway shopping bags with my clothes in. They were gone. And I thought, when you look that bad, it's 115 degrees in August on the streets of Phoenix, and you're sick and dying, and I couldn't think of a person to give us, there's nothing to do. I got to get off the street. And so I thought I'll go to A&A. And I looked him up in the phone book at something called the Arid Club on North 3rd Street, and I kind of tap danced over there, looked like a wealthy eccentric, I thought. And I sat there, I thought I'd let somebody 12-step me. But God, they stepped around me and over me. I stepped, and some old lady finally came over and she said, young man, are you sick? And I thought, oh, am I sick? I'd just been sitting there thinking, everything I've ever touched is gone. My parents, my father hasn't talked to me for years. My mother cries when she hears my name. And that's, I have a bunch of daughters who I'll never see again, but that's all right, because every time I see them, I think of the son I let die while I was in jail one time. I've lost my career. I've lost everything I've had, everywhere I've been, state after state. I've started off so well and gone to hell. I'm an old, broken man without any front teeth, and I couldn't think of one person who cared whether I lived or died. And this nice old lady said, are you sick? And I thought to myself, she means to be nice, and I won't hustle her because, she's trying. And then she said something that just made me crazy. She said, it's so nice that you younger folks are getting to AA before you've had to go all the way. So I allowed her to sponsor me in a 12-step house. She didn't have much money with her, but I took that. Told her she was so easy, I almost sent her home for more. It was just... But I took the money she gave me and I went to Los Angeles. I was on my way to Seattle. If I could just get to Seattle. I got to Los Angeles and I couldn't get out of that stinking town. And I went out to the A&A Club. Because when you look that bad, you can't go to the ad club. I'm an award-winning writer. You can't go to the Junior Chamber of Commerce. I used to be Junior Chamber of Commerce Young Man of the Year once. Going to sponsor my new front team. I went to A&A Club and hung around there, and I was so desperate and so cross, I did things I wouldn't do. In a moment of desperation, I got caught stealing the coffee money at an AA meeting, and I got banned out of the AA Club. I went out to the beach, something called the Tender Loving Care Club, and I hung around there, and that's what eventually became Synanon, and it was too sick for me then, and I was sick. And I wound up, I was going to write a book about Skid Row, because I was on Skid Row. But I didn't seem to have any pencil. And I got just waves of what in God's name has happened to me. This can't happen to me. And I wound up getting in a fight at a place called the Midnight Mission, being thrown out of there for fighting in the food line, because some guy said, Get over there against that wall if you want to eat. I didn't like the tone of his lousy, stupid voice. I told him to go screw. He and his friends just didn't even say a word. Just come over and threw me out. And one morning I was living in the all-night theater on Main Street for 30 cents a night and I walked over to the blood bank on East 4th Street to sell a pint of blood. And I hadn't even thought about it. I guess by this time, I found out later, I weighed 108 pounds and no front teeth and a T-shirt and some old pants and some tennies. And I was an old, old man. And I tried to sell a pint of blood again as I had done before, and they took a drop of blood out of my ear and said the iron level in my blood was no longer high enough to sell blood on Skid Row. And that morning I knew I was dying. And I remember thinking, God Almighty, what is wrong? By that time, I wish I were an alcoholic. I really wished I were an alcoholic or a narcotic addict or anything instead of a guy who has just been trapped in his own emotions year after year after year. I remember thinking, it sounds kind of ridiculous now, but it wasn't ridiculous that morning. I remember thinking, I wonder if my suicide in El Paso, I really died. And maybe this is hell, because I couldn't imagine anything worse. And there was a cold rain falling just to add a dimension of horror to the whole goddamn thing. And I couldn't get off the street. And when it's cold and raining on Skid Row, and you can't go into the Missions, there's nothing to do. You walk so you don't die. And I walked and walked and walked. And I walked 71 blocks. If I'd have thought I was going to walk 71 blocks, I wouldn't have started. And I wound up at that lousy, stinking AA club on Wilshire and Fairfax. And I started to go in, an old man named Tom Jones says, "You can't come in here. You stole a coffee mug." And I thought, you dirty, rotten AA puke. But I didn't say anything because I don't want to make trouble. I thought, what would an AA say? He said, "I guess I had a little slip." He said, "You never slip. You're just a phony son of a bitch." I said, "Yeah, that's right, Tom." But I added his name to the list of people I was going to kill in the future. I had a list longer than I was. He says, "Why don't you go in the back room and just don't tell anybody I let you in?" He said, "You just make me sick." I said, "Okay, Tom." I thought to myself, I'm going to pull out your goddamn fingernails someday. And I lay in the back room and thought, what am I going to do? I wish I were an alcoholic, but my problem isn't alcohol. When I get sober too long, I commit suicide. There's something terribly intense about me. I remember a psychiatrist once telling me, he says, you have such intense emotions, you will always have to have some modifying medication because your emotions are so intense. They're not erratic, they're just intense. I didn't know what that could be. And I'd been in psychoanalysis, and I had been in metaphysics. I had found existential truth that would boggle your mind. I got to be one of 6 people at one time in the whole state of Texas that understood truth. And the other 5 were just crapheads. Just crapheads. I had read philosophy. I read Nietzsche. I loved Nietzsche because Nietzsche's such a cynical, nasty guy, and I loved him. I didn't always understand it, but I loved it. You know, Nietzsche has said a lot of things. We were laughing about it earlier. That one of the things, I was raised in the Norwegian Lutheran Church, which is a very, very strict church. I heard today about the Southern Baptists. That's where our losers go. Yeah. If you're too much of, they smile, the Southern Baptist Church. They don't in the Norwegian Lutheran Church. This smiling is evidence of wrongdoing. And by the time I was 12 years old, I realized I was going to hell because, I hear people in AA all the time say things like, I've been searching for God for 30 years, and I found him here on the program. I never searched for God for 10 seconds. I know where God has been since I was 2 years old. He slowly circles the spire of the Our Savior's Lutheran Church in Eau Claire, Wisconsin. And he gives it to sinners. Boom. And he gives it to Catholics. Boom. And that's okay with me till you get to be one or the other. But there's little latitude, and I'll tell you, it's all you can say all you want about becoming an agnostic or an atheist. But if you have that rigorous early training, you cannot quite erode it. You cannot quite get it. You can fool yourself and others for months, but eventually you get to be tired or sick, and it just comes back. But you're going to hell. Like Hitler said, you give me their minds till they're 12, and they'll somewhere inside there will be Nazis till they're 90. And boy, that's the truth with strong religions. So I had to find some answer to God. Every time I went to AA, even hung around there, I couldn't bear AA anyway, but this God, it makes it intolerable, you know. I don't want to hear about God, because if God exists, I'm screwed forever. And you go to one of these dreadful meetings to get some cake and donuts and have some old well-meaning old flaky broad come up afterwards. Well, Sonny, we hate to see you fight God. And it really took every fiber of my being to keep from saying, well, ma'am, you'll never see me fight God again. And I didn't know what I love Nietzsche because, you know, Nietzsche said, for instance, that God is dead. One of his characters said, why worry so much about God? God, if he ever did live, is dead. That's a nice, touching thing to know when you're in trouble. A lot of people think that came out of Berkeley in 1965, but that was written in 1884, and I read it in the 1950s. And in fact, there's a very famous plaque in the Theological Seminary in the East that says, God is dead. Signed Friedrich Wilhelm Nietzsche, 1884. And beneath it says, Nietzsche is dead. Signed God, 1907. But I read Nietzsche and I read Schopenhauer, didn't understand much of it. I read if you're really a depressive, I always liked depressives. The founder of this organization was a depressive. I always had a warm spot. There's a book called The Decline of the West by Oswald Spengler. If you ever get terribly depressed, read that. It proves that everything you've ever believed in is phony. Everything is false. The world is made up of hypocrisy and cant. There is no hope anywhere. And if you're a depressive and read that cheers you up. I'll tell you. I don't know why it does, but it does. But you know, I am not. I wish I could be simple. I wish I could be an alcoholic. I wish I could be anything that didn't. I wish I hadn't been cursed with the ability to think. I wish I hadn't been cursed with the ability to spot crapheads. I wish I hadn't been cursed with the ability to see through the pretenses of the little organizations the world is made up of. I wish I had been born simple and dumb instead of perceptive and unhappy. Well, laugh if you want to. You can't imagine what it's like. That's the way I felt then. Today, pretty much the same, actually. But I thought, I got to get to Seattle or I'm going to die. So I'll play their sick little game. Just like I did an Old Man Ross in Big Spring, and I did on the guy in El Paso, and Dr. John Ashby in Dallas, and Fred Hannawall in Beloit, and the guy in Chicago, and the guy in Minneapolis. All these guys who I'd hustled when I found it expedient to go to A&A. I'll play their sick little game with them, and as soon as I'll just go along with it. I'll play just like I'm coming off shock treatments, and when I get a score, I'll be in Seattle. And screw them. And unfortunately for my plans, I played their sick little game too long. And they warped me. And much to my surprise, I haven't had a drink since that morning, although I never planned it that way. And it's been In a couple months, it'll be 22 years, and I haven't had any medications. I haven't, as I've said many times, I haven't been seduced by those well-intentioned but literally lethal members of the medical profession. I haven't smoked marijuana. I haven't been at all influenced by the little groups of weeds that grow up alongside the road of happy destiny every so often. Little pukes get together and think they're so cute. They say things like, "But the book doesn't mention pot, baby." It mentions people who are constitutionally incapable of being honest with themselves. That's close enough. I don't judge. But that's what kind of amuses me. You can see the continual effort to make non-lethal the use of marijuana, and the people, some of our members from time to time have followed along on this dreary path. And they always use the same argument. It's been proved in many laboratory demonstrations that people of a relatively level emotional nature can use marijuana without fear of serious damage. And what they always forget is people of a relatively level emotional nature ain't the ones going to use marijuana. They don't need it. It's the people who are flaky who need marijuana. Thank God it's not harmful. Well, just let me step over here to San Francisco. But anyway, so I haven't had any chemicals in my body, and much to my surprise, I sunk so low that I could not afford any decent therapy. And I was driven into this second-rate, pseudo-religioso goofiness called Alcoholics Anonymous, and it's the only therapy I've had since that day. Today I find myself in the position at least of a junior old-timer. I've come here tonight at tremendous expense, no little inconvenience, introduced badly, just to talk to you newer people who raised your hands here tonight and ask you this important question. Why can't you grasp the program the way we did in the old days? Yeah. Now, as you can tell, I have front teeth, so you know I must be getting better. Like our book says, we are like men who never grow new front teeth. They say you shouldn't pick your teeth in public. That's how I got those. I'll pick those, Doctor. Good. Those off-gray ones to fit the others there. I had a difficult recovery my first few months of sobriety. I lived in the back seat of an abandoned car. But there's an AA club parking lot, so there's a certain spiritual fallout that protected me. I got a job as a guy in AA gave me a job. My first job in sobriety was as a janitor in his jewelry store, a guy named Frank White. And I was fired after 2.5 days. He felt I was dusting too long amongst the watches. And I told him later. Later, I became his sponsor, oddly enough. Some years later, he paid for that son of a bitch. But I told him that was the smartest move you ever made, because I had a picture of me in Seattle saying, "See anything you like?" I was ready to go, boy. I got a job as a furniture mover, and I always hate to be pushed around by my inferiors. And remember the guy saying, "Hey, you without the front teeth! You bumped my lap!" I said, "No, you're mistaken, sir. I broke your goddamn lap." I got a job as a dishwasher at the Gaiety Delicatessen. I got fired because I don't want you to feel that I was paranoid, but I got the feeling the busboys were bringing in more dishes than the restaurant was using. which told me they were bringing them from other locations to make me look bad. So I didn't do them, and I got fired. I had a job as a janitor. I got a job, several jobs. By the time I was a year sober, I'd been sponsored all this time. I'd taken the steps, even in various moments of desperation. By the time I was a year sober, I was up to wrapping packages in an advertising agency. The same kind of job I'd had when I was 14 years old. And I just knew I was on a rocket to stardom. And by the time I was 2 years sober, I got a little job writing in the medical corporation. And I had a sponsor, a bad sponsor, like many people have had bad sponsors. In fact, it's kind of let's stop to think about that today. Today we're so concerned about not hurting the feelings of the new folks. And every old-timer talks about their rotten sponsor. I don't know, there may be a moral there somewhere, I just can't make it out. But I couldn't afford it. I looked so bad I couldn't get a decent society sponsor. You know, an AA leader type sponsor. That's the kind of sponsor when you call up in the night and say, Fred, I've been drinking. Oh my gosh. Wait right there. I'll be right over. I'll fix these. Just hang on. I'll get there. And he goes, oh, you want some food? Here, let me help. Now that's what I call a sponsor. I had some old weirdo who said things like, if you ever want to talk to me, call me before you drink. Because after you drink, all you're going to hear is a click and a dial tone. Don't encourage cruelty. And he helped me get some of these jobs I'd lost, so he got to be very cross about me losing my jobs all the time. And he'd ask me, I'd see him in the meeting and say, did you go to a meeting today? Or did you go to work today? And I'd, no, Bob, I got to think about my kids and how much I've lost, and I'm going to stay sober, but sometimes it's just, I've ruined everything in my life. I don't know where to turn. That was my variation of the Mr. Ross talk for that generation. I heard all that crap in your inventory. Get your ass to work. If you go to work every day, people don't know how much you hate it, and they think you're sincere. By the time I was 2 years sober, I got a little job in a medical corporation where I was working, writing about medical things when Librium came out and made me just salivate in my desk for a while. By the time I was 5 years sober, I was director of advertising, public relations at medical corporation, because I went to work every day, I guess. By the time I was 7 years sober, I'd become hip and slick again. They brought another guy and I into Hollywood, and we created the #1 hard rock station in the world, something called Boss Radio. We all had shiny suits. And hey, baby! Yeah. But you get sick of pimping the 13-year-olds after a while. When I was 10 years sober, I was downtown doing public relations to oil companies. God, they need it. When I was 15 years sober, I was marketing director for a publishing firm in Beverly Hills. When I was 5 years sober, the same wife and all those daughters heard the crinkle of green in my wallet all the way to Dallas, into a post office box that they were living in there. Leaped out of the post office box with hideous cries, fled to my side, attached themselves like a series of lamprey fish to a lake trout, bled me white. 9 months and 10 seconds later, another captain who was, he was the one playing football today. Like this. And then someone got me can't think of the word. What do they put on pianos? Metronome. I got a metronome. I never had any more children after that. I think it's kind of funny. I think about that kid. I was thinking about today. I was kind of laughing to myself, thinking, I was giving him some instructions over the phone before I came to the meeting. I thought just before I left, I had to send him to his room because he gave his mother some mouth. Not much, but 15-year-old mouth. Nothing as bad as I ever did. Clancy, go to your room. And I don't want you to come out here until you apologize to your mother. I happen to think, he's bigger than I am. Someday I'm going to say that and he'll say, Now, you don't have to go to your room unless you feel like it. I mean, maybe you'd like your allowance raised. Yeah. Now, isn't it a nice success story? We all live happily ever after out by the ocean in Los Angeles. Same family. Been married 30-some years now. People stop me in the streets of Eau Claire, where I was Friday with my mother and father, Thursday, on my way here. They say, how did you maintain the whole marriage together? You know, you were bad on your wedding week, you know. And how did you hold it together? Because marriages made in heaven are breaking up all over. And I always tell them there's 3 things you have to do. You have to have a lot of pluck and determination and marry a Catholic who can't get a divorce. That's... I don't know what order they come in, but that's a nice story, and there's only one thing that maybe, if you're new tonight, I know we want to get on to the dance, and I really can hardly wait to hear that loud rock. That little makes you sick. But there's a funny thing. There's only one thing that may puzzle you. How do you get from dying on the street to feeling better? You can say, well, you go to a lot of meetings, you work the steps, some days you just hang on. That don't quite get it. If you're a thinker. It's okay if you're a drinker, but if you're a thinker. Let me ask you this. I'll tell you something. The most important thing I have said tonight, or I will say before I sit down, I said a long time ago, and nobody paid any attention to it, nor should they. I said, my name is Clancy Imislund, and I am an alcoholic. And that is the single most difficult thing I ever had to come to believe in my life. I might be some kind of an alcoholic, but not an alcoholic like my fellows, as the book describes, or a real alcoholic. How can you be an alcoholic when your problem really isn't alcohol? Sometimes it is, because I like to drink and relax, and sometimes I drink too much, and sometimes I drink and have fun, and sometimes... But drinking does something good for me. Sometimes it does something bad for me later. But I don't drink because I'm one of these old crazy bastards who like to sit and drink and get goofy. I drink because it makes me feel different. That's why. And it doesn't do any good to go to meetings. I don't know if I ever heard it, but I thought I heard it many times. I mean, come in there sick and desperate and have one of these old AA speakers speaking at you. And they always look the same. They always got $350 suits and silvery hair and rosy cheeks and look quite a bit like Jim actually, but not Jim. But they say things like, friend, I stayed drunk for 41 years, night and day. Almost lost my job on 2 different occasions. Then one day I walked through that door, and I knew I was home. They told me to put the plug in the jug, and I did. And I've just never been so goddamn happy. Yeah. Now that's... AA works for that kind of people, but not people who think and have feelings and are burdened by memories and what might have been and if onlys and sensitivity. Now, how can I be an alcoholic if my problem isn't alcohol? Thank God I stayed here long enough and I was desperate enough to not be able to run away from people who weathered my disfavor to save my life. Now, you think about that a second. Because everybody here tonight either did or will have to make that decision. I do not like them. Shall I leave? And that is the dividing line, as Jim was saying this afternoon. I do not like the Dr. Fell or whoever it might be. And then your whole existence comes down to, I do not like them. shall I leave? And the answer to that is whether or not you will ever survive. I am glad that I could not get away, and so I did not run. I might have thought I had a little more strength and stamina or a place to go. But I came to learn the most single important fact of my life. And I want to say this clearly. Most of the people who have heard me talk before have heard me say this, but I want to say this to the people who have never heard me talk. I've never heard a more important fact. I am glad that I survived long enough to come to understand that if my problem is alcohol, I am not an alcoholic. And conversely, if I am an alcoholic, my problem is not alcohol. Now, doesn't that sound upside down? A little too many shock treatments down there in Texas, haven't we? But I'll tell you something. If your problem is alcohol, you really don't even have to go to AA. I've never really been able to understand, or I do now because I understand what they're trying to say, but what they're saying, in effect, is this. You hear speakers all the time say, all my life, alcohol was my problem. When I was sober, everything was wonderful. Then I get drunk, and everything went to hell. Then I got sober, everything was wonderful. Then I drank, and everything went to hell. Then I got sober, everything was wonderful. And I drank, and you just want to holler, why do you drink? Jesus, makes you sick. You know. I'll tell you. If your life is okay except when you drink, I've got a solution tonight that's going to revolutionize your future. You don't have to go to these cockamamie AA meetings. You don't have to be abused by funny-sounding old-timers. You don't have to put up with these hot barrack-like rooms. Yeah, I'll tell you what you do. The next time you're feeling good, just don't drink. And live happily ever after. That's all you have to do for your problem is alcohol. Don't drink and you're home free. But if it turns out that you suffer from what I suffer from, you may go to your grave maybe 30 years from now, maybe 2 weeks from now. If you're lucky, it'll be 2 weeks. And never have the slightest clue of what the hell was really wrong. Because you can prove it isn't alcohol till you die. It's a life that's it seems to be composed of stumbling from crisis to crisis, to building hopes and watching unfeeling hands ripping away, of trying to maintain integrity in a rotten world and even eventually having to nickel and dime your own integrity away just to keep even, of going from anticipation to disappointment again and again, of watching people turn bad around you, watching their pettiness and their nastiness and their hypocrisy, and never have the slightest idea what's wrong. And it turns out that particular lifestyle is the lifestyle I had and could not identify it and could not find a way out of it. But there's a name for an illness that characterizes much of that, with one addition. And it isn't alcohol. It sounds like alcohol, and we talk a lot about drinking in AA, so a lot of people think it's alcohol, and a lot of people come to AA and never can stay sober because they think they're here working on an alcohol problem. And it isn't. It's something called alcoholism. And the difference between an alcohol problem and alcoholism, it's a three-letter suffix. What the hell's the difference? But that's the difference, I believe, whether people like you and me will ever have any chance to walk in the sunshine in that world or whether we will furtively go for the rest of our lives. And the difference is just this. If your problem is alcohol, when you get sober, you are recovered. No further therapy is required. You just say, hey, man, that stuff is eating me up. I'm going to drink that no more. But in this funny disease called alcoholism, when you get sober, unfortunately for you and me, it looks exactly the same. It looks the same to your family. It looks the same to your doctor as a rule. It looks the same to your employer. It looks the same to the police. But most deadly, it looks the same to the patient. Because nobody ever seems to understand at that juncture. The thing that characterizes alcoholism is that it continues on after you're sober. Only nobody, you don't slur your words, and you don't stumble and fall down anymore. You say, I'm straight. But alcoholism doesn't manifest itself that way. It seems to attach itself to emotional perceptions and reactions that distort the perception of reality. And there's no way to know it. There is no highway patrolman who's got a balloon to blow up to measure your anxiety today when you're sober and trying to hang on. And there's no white line to walk to see how badly you need someone to love you. And they can't take a drop of blood out of your ear and determine, say, this fellow's really feeling a lot of frustration. We should help him. Because when you're straight, you're supposed to be straight. And then you're okay. And these perceptions begin to warp and get reactions. And the reactions, I see them sometimes as like this. What are alcoholic emotions? I mean, not really alcoholic, but those emotions, that type of personality. You begin to wonder what people really mean by that. I heard what you said, son of a bitch, but what did you really mean? Why do they all seem to like each other more than they like me? Why doesn't anybody care how I feel, really? And you go on and on and on until you get to a point I think of as graying out. You still see the world, you still see the colors, the green, the blues, but there's a patina of emotional gray over everything. I'm sure most people in here have had that feeling, where everything is all right, but it's just a gray, pointless, frustrating, stinking world. Now that does not make you an alcoholic. There's another term for that. Medically speaking, that's called acute neurosis. One other thing must be present to be an alcoholic. Alcohol must have a special effect on you that it doesn't have on most people. Now, what is that special effect? Makes you drunk all the time? Nah. Is it that every time you take a beer, your hair grows long and you leap on passing nuns? Nah. Makes you drunk all the time? Not at all. What's the worst night of the year to go out and drink? Amateur night. New Year's Eve. Those crapheads out there, they don't know how to drink for nothing. You know. If you ever want to have some heartaches, go out. I'm not that you would, but go watch. I remember thinking, the one night I want to be off the street is New Year's Eve because amateurs don't know how to drink. They don't know when they're going to throw up. Everybody in this room and all the speakers that we've heard, you got at least 15 seconds to you recognize the symptoms. You say, pardon me, just a second. Anybody got a cert? These people don't know what those symptoms are, is it? Well, then I was saying to Betty, I said, you son of a bitch. They don't know when they're going to fall down. Everybody in this room, I'm sure, 100 times has developed that art of... Those people just fall down. They don't know enough. They try to drive with two eyes, you know. Boom, boom. They'll never know what we know. This is the way. This is the way. Yeah. It seems to come down to something that eluded me for years when I was battling whether or not I was an alcoholic, and that's this. The measure of the alcoholic really is not what alcohol does to you. It's something much more complex. It's what alcohol does for you. And it's something nobody that it does something for ever seems to realize. But I had to come to understand that alcohol literally has the ability to alter my perception of reality. And it doesn't do that for most people who drink. But it literally changes the way the world looks. There is no therapy in the world that works as well as alcohol on an alcoholic. There isn't a person in this room who doesn't know the feeling when you're uptight and tense and you've done everything you can. You take a drink and it goes, Nothing changes, but God, it looks different. Now, if alcohol does for you, that's something that for you, it's great. And nobody ever who has it never knows it doesn't do that for other people, and the people it doesn't do it for doesn't know it does it for you. So you're screwed no matter where you go. But if it does that for you, eventually it starts to do something to you because it erodes further your ability to cope with reality. Because you don't have to learn to cope with conflict if you got something, a way to disguise it. And eventually you get to a point where alcohol begins to be a problem. And sometimes it's people have drunk 30 years before they cross that invisible line. Sometimes they cross that line the first drink they take. But when they do, it begins to be an imperative in their life, in people like me. And then you got to stay sober. And being sober is just like being naked in a porcupine factory. It's just, everywhere you sit, it's just bad. It's just bad. And so the curse of alcoholism, it turns out, is not that you can't get sober, not that you go to a treatment center and be straightened out. If you can't afford a treatment center, you can, as was said, lay on the bathroom floor. That works all the time. Or I sometimes hear people in AA say things like, I can't get off of this one. I can't get off of this one. I give them a solution I found in Minneapolis in 1950. Slap a cop. Here. You're off of this one right now? But what can you do when you get off of it and the world slowly goes to hell around you little by little? And the tensions come back. And you know that you're different. You know, I thought if I had to design a flag for AA, I think we should have one. Every other flaky organization got one. And you had to design a flag that we could all gather under and march unto Washington. You know, if Joe were in the lead, we'd say, well, here we are in Seattle. You know. But if we had to march onto Washington, you know, what would you put on that flag? I need booze. I need alcohol. Something much more intense. Just this. But you don't understand. That's all I know. And that's all you know and we all know. But you don't understand. And it's hard to realize that Alcoholics Anonymous is not designed to help you with your drinking problem. There is no agency in the world that can help you once alcohol begins to do something special for you. Now you have to deal in the battlefield of sobriety, and sobriety is untenable. I just want to say this quickly. I think the best definition I ever got of alcohol, what alcohol does when I was sober about a year, and I went through all this stuff, and I'd taken these steps. I was wrapping packages, and I was working in this advertising agency on Wilshire Boulevard wrapping packages, and I had no front teeth yet, and I thought, these guys running this advertising, I'm smarter than they are, but they'll never know because I look so bad. And one of our accounts was something called Kamchatka vodka. I don't know if you have it here, but they have it up and down the coast, and they've used the same billboard for 40 years as this. Vodka is pronounced Kamchatka. And I came by with my packages one day, and these dumbbells were laying out a new board, different colors, different lettering, but the same words. I thought, I'm going to let them know there's a guy back there who's got a little something on the ball. I come out. Says, none of my business, guys, but how about putting on your billboard there, Kamchatka vodka goes boom. Better than all vodkas everywhere. And they looked up at me and said, that's supposed to be funny? Why don't you wrap your goddamn packages? We'll write the billboard. If that hadn't been for to report to my sponsor, I'd have punched him right in the face. But okay. I went to a meeting that night. I was just crazy. That's determination. A year sober, and you make a suggestion, they laugh at you. I saw my sponsor. Shut up, he explained. I said, Bob, God damn it. I'm hung in there doing these things. Lived in an abandoned car 10 months. I try to get these guys to put me down because I got a front or something. Tell me the story. So I told them the story just like I told it to you, a little more flamboyantly. I said, you see, I gave them a good idea. Whether they used it or not, at least they couldn't listen. But they wouldn't listen. Oh, God. Said, why don't you get this through your head? They are not against you. He used to have a want to wave his finger under my nose when he was... The only time I ever really missed my front teeth. I said, you know. But I wasn't going to give him the pleasure of gumming it, I'll tell you that. He says, don't you understand? They're not against you. They don't know what the hell you're talking about. What's that supposed to mean? I've been telling you for a year now. Don't you understand? People like that, Kamchatka vodka doesn't go boom. To them, Kamchatka vodka goes bleh. That's why you're in this meeting and they're not. The next time you may wish that you were a non-alcoholic or secretly think you are, I will tell you, in my opinion, there isn't an alcoholic in the world who could stand to be a non-alcoholic. Would you like to have your back to the wall and the hounds of fate ripping at your throat? Oh, God! And that'd go... Blah, blah, blah. There isn't... 93% of the world's drinkers will never, ever know what we have always taken for granted. When your back's to the wall and the hounds are ripping at your throat, it doesn't go blah. It goes... Bring on your goddamn hounds, Mrs. Baskerville. Yeah. 2 more drinks, you can be leaning intimately next to the lady on the next stool and say, "You with anyone, Granny?" But if alcohol goes boom for you, it will always go boom for you. And by the time it doesn't go boom for you, it's too late. That's why, you got to remember, the reason I said all this is to say these next 2 sentences. Alcoholics Anonymous is not a place to work on your drinking problem. Alcoholics Anonymous is a place to work on a problem if there is no place else on which to work. That is sobriety. The purpose of AA, despite what you may think, is not to make you wonderful, highly spiritual. I mean, you get spiritual, but not in the way you think about it. Some people come here, learn how to pronounce God, and become so spiritual they float out the top. They just... The last words are, "I no longer need meetings, I walk alone with God." Then one day God gives them a beer, and here they come. Yeah. As all the speakers have said today, the purpose of AA is to act your way through certain situations, and little by little, the purpose of AA, I believe in the bottom line, is to do the same thing alcohol used to do. To little by little alter my perception of reality. To make things change that don't change. They look different little by little. AA is a much slower way than wine. But you don't have to vomit up chapter 5 every morning. That's sit-up. There's something to be said. And the most important thing to remember for new people, I think, is you don't get sick like this. We get sick like this. Oh, I've got it under control, thank Christ. Oh, I'm not keeping even. Oh. And you don't get better like this, despite how fast AA talks go. Everybody gets better like this. Oh, I found a wonderful new way of life, and I'm... Oh, Jesus Christ. Oh. And What you and I have got to do is hang on to each other when you go through those dips so you don't think this is the end of it all. Because the point of AA is to little by little, whether it does anything for me or not, make the rest of the world shape up. Just little by. And one day they get almost tolerable, but then if you get carried away and don't take care of yourself, they know it and act funny again. That's why they say don't get too hungry, angry, lonely, tired. Not because they're bad things. Those are things that push perception triggers that make things look crappy. That's why you don't want to do them. The purpose of AA is to make the world shape up. That's why I still go to meetings regularly. That's why I was at my home group this week, and will be another one tomorrow night in Los Angeles. It's not because I'm a zealot, but I know that if I don't go to meetings, strangers know about it and act funny. And that's what we're here for. And that's what when they mean to say, you go to a lot of meetings, you work the steps, and some days you just hang on. And little by little, it gets better. There's only one thing I want to say before I sit down. I've said this before. But you got to be careful you don't stay in AA active too long, because it can warp you further than you meant to go. I wanted to get here, and somehow I kept going. And about 6 years ago, I found myself in a position where I left a job as a marketing director in Beverly Hills. And now, as most of you know, for the last 6 years, I'm no longer a marketing wizard out in Hollywood. I'm the director of the Midnight Mission on Skid Row in Los Angeles. Don't clap. If you're touched, take up a love offering. And my friends were just staggered. They said, what the hell would you give up that job to work at the Midnight Mission? I told them. I told that son of a bitch when he threw me out I'd be back. That isn't, I don't know why. They guaranteed me such a significant decrease in salary I couldn't pass it up. It just... I don't know why. I was just tired of advertising. I was tired of writing stuff I didn't believe to impress people I didn't like. And, true story. And I don't know, I always had, and it is not an alcoholic treatment center. I'm not putting down alcoholic treatment centers. I know that a lot of people are here because of alcoholic treatment centers. They don't stay here because of alcoholic treatment centers, but they get here that way. I'm not an alcoholic counselor. I'm not even qualified to be an alcoholic counselor. Most of my sobriety, I worked. Never had a chance to take that 2-week course. I don't mean that in a negative sense. I'm just reporting. We work at a level way below that. We work at people who are, you know, I used to, for years, come to work and have the pleasure of having my secretary bring me a cup of coffee and morning report, and I'd say how our sales were in New York and Chicago, and if we were going to sell in Paris next year, should we go to the book fair in Germany, and just great. I go to work now, it isn't that way. I feel at my desk, who got stabbed in the doorway last night, and who fell downstairs and snapped their spine in a convulsion, and who, in fact, who's got the knives now? This is the first time in my life that I have felt sufficiently constrained that I've recently gone to the police academy in Los Angeles. I took 5 of my employees to go through the licensing procedure to carry mace, because there's so many knives on Skid Row now, you just can't tell when they're coming. And you've got to have something ready. First time that's ever happened. And we try to help people do better. It's not alcoholic treatment at all. It's way below that. It's trying to keep them alive. We feed maybe 200,000 meals a year, and we bed down 50,000 men. And the funny thing is we don't take any funds from anybody. I send a letter twice a year to the citizenry, and the donations keep it going. We have to take any crap from nobody. We just do it any way we want to. And somehow when I go, I'll let you know when to clap. Somehow when I go home at night, I get in my car and leave Skid Row and go back to my home out by the ocean, and my boy telling me about his football practice. I feel more like a man than I did coming down all the elevators in Beverly Hills in my shiny suit being slick. I don't know why that is. Just shows you how AA can screw you up forever, I guess. Now, don't misunderstand me, you people who raised your hands tonight. Even if you go to meetings, even if you go to sponsor, mean sponsor, even if you'd work the steps. We can't guarantee you that in 15 years you can have your own mission. You know. You may have to get rich, you dummies. But I can guarantee you something even better than that. I can guarantee you that most of the time you'll be in a world almost free of crapheads. You'll be in a world that makes sense. I don't know any better feeling that I have than to walk down the street of Eau Claire, Wisconsin, Thursday, leaving my mother on my way to see my father, people who I never would see again, my children who are very close to me now. In fact, one of my daughters and her husband and my grandchildren are somewhere in Kansas on their way to their new university in Kentucky where they're going to teach at this fall. They're just having a ball. And everything is going good in my life. And it'll go good as long as I remember what's happening. Before I sit down and say one thing, I saw some of you people in New Orleans. I want to tell you about something that happened to me at the International Convention, maybe give you some hope. In 1970, I was the noon speaker of the International Convention in Miami Beach. On July 4th, Independence Day. God, what a wonderful thing. And I looked at the program. The first speaker of the morning on July 4th was the man who took me to my first meeting in Eau Claire, Wisconsin in 1949. And the last speaker that night at the Old Timers meeting was my current sponsor. Not the one I had when I was new, he died, but the one I had for the last 15 years, a man named Chuck C. And I was the noon speaker, and I talked, and by God, I had a feeling of oneness. I'd been a barb and a defiant member of AA, and I'd started new groups to punish people, and I did too, I'll tell you. And it somehow I had the feeling that was the major spiritual breakthrough of my life. I had spiritual breakthroughs, but as the young man Max read tonight, spiritual breakthroughs aren't always instant wins, they're evolving things. And I thought, for once I've got the oneness with AA. I have waited 12 years to feel this spiritual surge. And I was coming home in the plane, I thought, I don't have to be some barb in the society anymore. I could be a leveler. I could help people with love and understanding and not get upset. I'm going to be better in my home and better in my job. On Monday morning, I got on the freeway, the Santa Monica Freeway downtown. I had my rear view mirror set so I could see the road and a little bit of me, because I had not seen myself without any tension, just love. And I looked forward to the best day of my life. And I came onto the San Diego freeway, and a little old lady in a Toyota came off the off-ramp about 70 miles an hour and just missed me by maybe a half an inch, just like that. And the new spiritual leader of the Western States, without blinking an eye, just lowered his window. You crazy bitch! That's not your car! God damn you! Well, just go. I had to chase her all the way to La Brea Avenue just to come up next to her and say, I forgive you, you bitch! So I thought, I'll go to a couple more meetings. I want to tell you something. Where the world gets to be a good place, but you never can tell there's going to be some old bitch in a Toyota coming at you. So I suggest you stay here with our distinguished speakers who've been here for many years, with people in this community who've been sober a number of years, not to become wonderful or fantastic, but something infinitely more important, to live in a world that you enjoy. When that happens, it's worth everything it could. Thank you.